Good afternoon. Welcome to this session of the Welsh Affairs Committee. Delighted to welcome Secretary of State for Wales Simon Hart and Parliamentary Under Secretary of State Davies. For this evidence session, we're going to cover a number of topics this afternoon pertinent to current inquiries that we as a committee are undertaking into the economic response to COVID-19 in Wales, also looking at the Shared Prosperity Fund and the implications for Wales of potential post-Brexit trade deals, and there may be other issues as well that individual members of the committee wish to raise. So I'm very grateful that for the time that you've given us this afternoon, and it's great to be back physically present in front of you rather than just all of us doing it remotely. Can I just emphasise to colleagues and to guests, if we can keep our questions and answers as concise as possible, then we've got the best possible chance of covering as much ground as possible. Can I start by asking the Secretary of State just a very quick opening question? We haven't discussed it before, but there's a lot of interest around the idea of strengthening the union at the moment. The government did, of course, commission Lord Dunlop to produce a report on this and make recommendations. I understood the government had accepted his work, but we've still not seen that document. It hadn't been published. Do you have any idea when the Dunlop review will see the light of day?
Thank you. And by the way, thanks very much for the invitation to appear again in yet another format. There are numerous subject headings, as we've just had been described. If by any chance there are sort of very detailed areas, I make the same commitment I always make in these meetings, which is we can always follow up with sort of supplementary and hopefully helpful information subsequently. As far as Dunlop is concerned, it's been a sort of ongoing subject. It pops up from time to time. I don't think there's anything particularly suspicious about the fact that it hasn't appeared. I think we are nearer to a publication date than we perhaps realise, but I don't know much more than that. I can't really give you much clearance on it, other than a lot of the initial rumours about what Lord Dunlop might or might not be recommending are to some extent actually already in hand because of the way in which the union is now being addressed at cabinet level.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary of State. Can I move on to the Internal Markets Bill then and ask you, Secretary of State, at what point did you and your ministerial colleagues decide that pursuing a collaborative, consensual approach to this subject with the devolved administrations wasn't worth continuing with, and that actually the solution had to be a Westminster design solution imposed on the devolved administrations?
Well, can I start by saying I don't sort of recognise that scenario even now. I think there is still potential for a collaborative approach. In fact, I think there should be a collaborative approach. There has been a public consultation, Welsh Government and others, but even more importantly, Welsh businesses and members of the public in Wales have been entitled to contribute to that, to read the white paper, to see what it means for them, and to submit their views. We have on things like the common frameworks, there's been discussions going on at official level for several years. So the notion that somehow there was a moment when we thought, right, to hell with this, we're proceeding just sort of on our own, that has never been the case. It isn't the case now, and it isn't the case in the future. That said, there always has to be a moment when, particularly there's a publication of a bill, where there needs to be a sort of degree of what's what I suppose I'm looking for, a sort of drafting process, following which bill is produced, following which views will then be heard either in private or in the chamber in the normal way. So I sort of don't really recognise that scenario.
If that is actually the case in the Secretary of State, as you described, were you surprised then by the reaction from Welsh Government ministers overnight? Very strong reaction.
I think I was probably more mystified than surprised, if there is a difference, because I don't recognise some of the accusations which are being made about the UK Internal Markets Bill. And the reason for that is, I could spend all afternoon talking about this, by the way, which you probably wouldn't appreciate. But to my mind, what we're actually seeing here is the enshrinement in UK law of a model that has existed for some time anyway. The businesses we've spoken to all look at me when we say we're doing this and say, well, big deal. So what? Of course that's what we expect. That's the way we currently operate. So the fact that you're actually just simply moving the current arrangements from EU to UK makes complete sense, entirely logical, and therefore, nothing to see here. So I was surprised that Welsh Government chose to take a rather sort of contrary view to all of the businesses that we spoke to and submitted their views to the consultation process. Those views were not reflected by Welsh Government, which makes me think that their reaction is about politics, and the community who responded to the consultations was about jobs and livelihoods. And that's quite a worrying divergence, I think.
At what point did you share with Welsh ministers in Cardiff the specifics of the financial expenditure measures that were included in the bill?
There was a reference to spending powers, if that's what you're referring to, in the white paper. There have been opportunities, and indeed there have been a number of comments on social media and public about what that might entail. What's come out in the bill, as I say, is I hope a sort of business as usual arrangement. It's exactly what is the functions currently undertaken by the European Union, transferring back to the UK and benefiting Welsh Government in the process, by the way, in terms of powers. So I would argue that there have been quite a lot of opportunities to discuss in detail what that might actually mean. And as I said, we spoke to Welsh Government Minister this morning. It didn't come up in that conversation. Always repeat the offer that I always make. Very happy to talk about these things with Welsh ministers at any time. And we've put an offer into the First Minister to do that this week. We haven't heard back yet, but we will hopefully have a conversation.
So from what you say, they shouldn't have been surprised by the inclusion of these measures in the bill. I'm struggling to see.
I don't think, others may take a different view, I don't think there is anything in the spending powers provision that should spook anybody. After all, these are arrangements which have existed for all of the time we've been members of the European Union, and now that we're leaving the European Union, those arrangements are falling under the jurisdiction of UK and Welsh Government. That to me isn't a threatening situation. For me, that is in democratic terms and in economic terms, quite a step forward. So if the accusation, as we know it is, which was made on the publication of the bill by Welsh Government, that this was a power grab, that's the mystifying bit for me. Because Welsh Government will actually have 70 additional powers as a consequence of this process than they currently have. There isn't a single thing that they currently do, not one, which they will not be able to do when this process passes through its legislative stages. So somebody might tell me, but I would love to know what powers that Welsh Government currently enjoys that it won't be able to enjoy when UKIM becomes law, because we don't know of any of those, and but as I say, somebody on the call in the group might.
Mm-hmm. Would you acknowledge, though, that given the strength of the comments from Welsh Government in the last 24 hours about the bill that's been published, that it represents a significant breakdown in trust between the two administrations?
Well, again, I think if we look at our responsibilities through the prism of jobs and livelihoods, then it shouldn't. If we look at these things simply through the prism of political one-upmanship and power, then that's there is a distinction between us. I don't think. I always try to look at these things through the eyes of people who are trying to, restore order to their business and their lifestyle and their livelihoods in a very testing sort of COVID and post-COVID period. I think that what is expected of both governments is to never let that image out of our minds when it comes to trying to decide how we best sort of move from being a member of the European Union to being an independent UK again. And so I actually genuinely think that there is still plenty of scope for collaboration and cooperation, which I'm very up for. But it is, we're not going to fight the Brexit battle again. That ship has sailed.
Can I move the discussion on to the Shared Prosperity Fund? When you appeared before the committee towards the end of May, I believe, you talked about the need for urgency on developing the Shared Prosperity Fund, that in light of the economic consequences of COVID, I think you said that it would become an even hotter topic within government. I think you kind of admitted that progress had been slow up to that point over the winter. I have to say, from where I sit on this committee, I've seen precious little evidence of serious work being done in Whitehall on the Shared Prosperity Fund over the summer months. Perhaps you can change my mind on that.
I suspect I probably can't change your mind as much as you would like it to be changed, because progress remains slow, but it's not non-existent. And in fact, there's a meeting, I think next week, I was just checking my notes with Jeremy Miles, UK Government and Welsh Government, on the next stage of how we do this. I think it is important, even though there have been, and I'm as frustrated as anybody by the pace these things progress, and the fact that there are so many other sort of competing factors which we could argue have delayed this process. I think it is important to remember, though, that the commitments, all of the commitments which have been made around UK shared prosperity still stand. So there's no alteration, as far as we're concerned, to any of the things which either David or I might have uttered, or indeed UK government more widely.
So Secretary of State, so on that point about the commitments that lie behind the Shared Prosperity Fund, one of those firm commitments is around partnership working with the devolved administrations, in our case with the Welsh Government. I'm interested in the expenditure powers that the internal market gives UK government, because it's not clear to me what the funding pot is to be used. And when I look at possible options, I can't see what possible expenditure can be used to fulfil these new functions that UK government would have, unless it's the Shared Prosperity Fund. So is the purpose of the clauses in the Internal Markets Bill to basically put the UK government in the driving seat for spending the Shared Prosperity Fund as it sees fits in Wales and Scotland?
I don't think it's as clear-cut as that. There are three, maybe more, funding routes which have been discussed publicly around the spending powers. Is it somehow interlinked with Barnet, to which the answer is no? Is it new money, to which the answer is no, because for now, maybe in the future, for now, the proposal is fiscally neutral for reasons I expect everybody would understand, which leaves in some people's mind the only funding pot available for the new spending powers as UK shared prosperity. But what I think has been lost in some of the debate around this is that the spending powers proposal is it is exactly what it says on the tin. It is a spending powers mechanism. It's not about quantum. It's not about projects. It's not about individual items that either UK Gov or Welsh Gov may wish to infrastructure projects that either government might want to press ahead.
Do you have a shopping list for it?
Say again?
Do you have a shopping list for it to be used?
Well, I think I have had I think I've shared a shopping list with this committee. We've been working on a shopping list for Wales, certainly ever since my day, and probably my predecessor too, because it's all part of the levelling up agenda, it's all part of strengthening the union, it's all things which we think join the UK together in a way which will actually create investment opportunities and jobs in Wales. So yes, absolutely we have a shopping list, and we never stop pestering our ministerial colleagues saying that this is what we would like to see happening in Wales in order to, and in fact to accelerate economic recovery given what the country has been through. So, as I say, I think that where does UK SPF feature in all of this? Nothing changes in terms of my ambition and the ambition of the government to do this on a collaborative basis. But I think the really important thing is that up till now, that collaboration has been between the EU and Welsh Government. That element of this is coming to an end. So the role currently fulfilled, or hitherto previously fulfilled by the EU, there will be a much more obvious and clear presence of UK government in that process than ever before. But I would like to think that people who might be watching or people who might be affected by this in Wales will recognise that for the first time for 45 years, that process will involve politicians who are elected by voters in Wales for voters in Wales. It's much more personal than it's ever been before, and that has to be a step forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Secretary of State. I'm very keen to bring in other colleagues. Can I just finish off by asking you, the Prime Minister, again, it was reported over the weekend, I know he's made similar comments earlier in the summer, saying that effectively an Australian-style trading arrangement with the EU, what other people call no deal, would be, I think in the Prime Minister's words, a good outcome, a good option for the United Kingdom. He's been very robust about that. Do you share that view when it comes to Welsh economic interests?
Well, David TC may have some views on this. I have attempted so far in this process to recognise that in any negotiation, and particularly this one, that there was an awful lot of sort of heat and not necessarily a corresponding amount of light when it comes to the reportage or coverage of these matters. This thing will go to the 11th and a half hour, just like every negotiation does, just like all of the other EU dilemmas that we've had. There is going to be a significant amount of bluff, double bluff, triple bluff before we actually know how this story is going to end. As far as we're concerned at the moment, the intention is to do the deal which is still possible. And I'm not going to say anything now which hints that we are in active consideration about what plan B, C, D or E might be. Because as far as we're concerned, plan A remains achievable and that's what we're seeking to deliver.
And absolutely, we hope plan A is achievable and deliverable, but nevertheless plan B does loom large behind all of this. And the evidence that we've taken as a committee points to significant impacts on Welsh economic interests, agriculture, steel, manufacturing, I could name others. And I would have thought as part of the government's approach right now, given the timescales involved, that a lot of preparation would be going into the plan B.
But I know what you're saying, but the trouble is it not? Is if we have a casual chat around this table about what B and C and D look like. That's essentially the same thing as saying that those are in active consideration. So I don't want to give the impression we've done enough sort of hand-wringing around this issue for some time. We have to look our EU colleagues in the eye now and say we are not bluffing. There isn't. There's been so much of that over the last few years, and you and I come from the same position on this. We have to now be serious about it. In the few weeks and months we have left to do, we cannot leave any grounds for ambiguity. So I don't want to contribute to anybody's interpretation that I was being ambiguous. As far as I'm concerned, we are going for the deal. I don't think I can add much to that, David.
Thank you. Under Secretary.
See, I concur with what the Secretary of State for Wales has said, but just to throw in that my understanding is at the moment the European Union are expecting us to agree to their rules on fisheries and state aid before they are prepared to discuss the rest of the deal. And I don't think there's a single member of this committee, many members here I know very well, and I know their views differ a little bit from the government's on the pros and cons of Brexit, but I can't believe there's a single member of this committee that thinks it would be a good idea for us to sign up to EU legislation on fisheries and state aid before we can even discuss a further deal. So, of course, the government have alternative plans, and that's why we've put in a £50 million support package to boost the capacity of the customs intermediary sector. We've announced £705 million package of investment for border infrastructure, staff and technology. We are prepared to leave without a deal, but of course we hope that the European Union will come to their senses and accept that we are approaching this with an open mind.
Sure, absolutely accept to that. The question was whether you as a ministerial team agree with the Prime Minister's assessment that no deal, not striking the deal with the EU, would still be a good option, and for our purposes is after a good option for Wales.
Well, I think we accept it would be a far better option for Wales than signing up to the European Union state aid rules and fisheries policy before we can even discuss having a deal, which we then may or may not get.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in Geraint Davies from Swansea. Geraint?
Thank you, Chair. Secretary State, I just want to ask you a couple of questions, one on the internal market really and one on trade. So moving on the internal market, a lot of the concern is about increased spending powers for the UK over Wales. And would you acknowledge that where there's already been very, very significant spending powers, in particular on railways, we've had a situation where Wales had 1.5% of the investment for 5% of the population and 11% of the railways. So there's a concern if more and more spending power is given to Whitehall, that we won't get our fair deal as we have in the past.
Shall I have a
yes,
go at that? I see it differently. I think this increases the chances of us being able to engage in significant infrastructure schemes in Wales rather than decreasing. For too long, there's been an acceptance and a reliance to some extent that infrastructure has to come under the Barnett arrangements, which never, as people have argued here, never quite leaves a significant a sum of money significant enough to do really big-scale, really adventurous infrastructure projects. What this does is provide much greater flexibility for both governments to collaborate over those big schemes and to rely on the, if you like, the clout that each provides. So I think this is a step forward and shouldn't be seen in any sense as a threat to the very proper sort of democratic arrangements which are in place.
So is there a danger possibly of incoherence? For example, Welsh Government's coming forward with a clean air bill, and if the Westminster Government sort of imposed a load of massive motorways that breach the clean air standards, there would be incoherence. I mean, isn't it better to have a quantum of money to Wales so that it can be spent in a coherent way to develop both our environment and our economy, so we have a green recovery rather than one hand doing one thing and one hand doing the other thing, in particular given that there's been a breakdown in collaboration that we've seen now exposed in the internal market, where it's been called a power grab, and that's not a symptom of a good relationship, is it?
Well, it's always, I mean, it would be completely unrealistic, I think, for us to expect that on every issue, all the time, we're always going to agree on policy matters between Welsh Government and UK Gov. And just the same in the handling of COVID, and Mark Drakeford's been, I think, on the record as saying this, on 8 out of 10 occasions, we agree, and we are able to put together policies which are pretty consistent between the two governments. But on 2 out of 10 occasions, sometimes there is a degree of divergence, which is inevitable. In some cases, may have some evidential basis for being that way. But it doesn't mean, just because we hit a bit of turbulence in the relationship, that's terminal. As far as I'm concerned, I'm more than happy, completely happy to continue a reasonable, courteous, positive and ambitious relationship with Welsh Gov. Any minister, we never turn down a meeting request from a trade. We will continue to do that. And I don't buy the idea that it leads to incoherence. It hasn't led to incoherence in Germany. It hasn't led to incoherence in the US. There's no reason at all why it should lead to incoherence here. In fact, what it will do is facilitate the easier flow of money than is the case at the moment, where we've found examples, for example, where we wanted to spend money in devolved areas to support the work of Welsh Gov, but we can't because of the devolution settlement. And there's a few examples of those which we've already unearthed. This will make it easier.
So on collaboration then, and moving on to trade, clearly there's a concern from the Welsh Government that they haven't been involved in the Brexit negotiations. I know the UK government's taken a very hard line on this. But if we do end up with a no deal, and there hasn't been any consultation with the Welsh Government, who might want to compromise in areas to get a deal for the good of the Welsh economy, surely that undermines the union, because if we end up being burdened by a no deal when it could have been avoided with some collaboration, that would have been a good. So how can you excuse the fact that, again, the UK government's hurtling ahead without listening to Welsh Government? We may end up with a no deal as a result.
I mean, if I may, obviously there was an opportunity for a deal in 2019 which was refused by a majority in this House. I believe that you, sir, were one of them. So the Welsh Government at that time also opposed a deal that would have kept us indefinitely in this transition period. I think we have to accept we moved on from that approach. We are, as we've set out, doing our utmost to get a deal, a free trade arrangement with the European Union. But if it doesn't work out, then we'll be trading with the rest of the EU on exactly the same terms as Australia does at the moment. It certainly wouldn't be our first option. We do want that deal, but we can't possibly sign up to an arrangement where we have to agree on state aid rules, European Union state aid rules, and European rules on fisheries before we can even discuss a deal. And I would invite you, Mr. Davies, or anyone else to tell me if you think that that would be a good approach.
Well, I think it would be a good approach if it would keep tens of thousands of jobs in Wales. I mean, I haven't got a big problem with the rules in the EU, which has been very successful over the last 40 years. But moving on, can I just ask about mutual recognition and non-discrimination in the internal market legislation? Because my understanding is that, you know, in Wales we want to defend the value of the standards and the quality of our foods against, for example, hormone-impregnated beef from the United States. This legislation means that we can't warn Welsh. Firstly, we're obliged to agree with the hormone-impregnated beef agreed by Westminster. And secondly, we're not in a position to label it so that people, if they don't want to have it, don't have to eat it. And again, there's been no involvement in this with the Welsh Government, and we're at risk. Our jobs are at risk, our food standards are at risk, Secretary of State.
Sorry. I don't know. Really quick one. I just want to reassure you that it has been an ongoing relationship, particularly between Jeremy Miles and Michael Gove, and indeed ministers from other devolved governments throughout these negotiations. They always start with by the way, we would have done this differently. But the idea that there has been no sort of collaboration, cooperation is not true. Not that you're suggesting it is, but there does have to be a decision-making process. Otherwise, could go around in circles.
Thank you, Secretary. Oh, do you want to follow up?
I wanted to add, obviously, we have existing legislation that prevents any kind of hormone-treated beef coming into this country, or chicken, for example, that has chicken that's been washed with chlorinated water. That's not going to change. And there is absolutely no plan and no intention to cut standards. We have been part of a single market with the rules set by Brussels. We wish to remain part of a single market within the United Kingdom, and there has to be a power setting what the standards are going to be, and that will be with the UK government.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to move on. I'm going to bring in Virginia Crosby in a moment, but we've got quick supplementaries from Tonya Antonazzi and Rob Roberts. Tonya, very quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, you've spoken about the Internal Markets Bill creating an easier flow of money to Wales. And what I'm worried about is I saw your predecessor, actually sign off on the Swansea Bay City deal, and that money went direct into that city deal. So, it can happen. He was able to do it. So surely this is not an impossibility. And what are your comments?
I think that all of these things build on one another. You're absolutely right with the Swansea deal, but this just provides even greater flexibility, even than that does, without compromising, as I said earlier on, Welsh Government's ability to spend on the priorities that it decides. We just had three examples. The issue we had around flooding earlier on in the year was massively complicated by legal obstacles provided by the devolution settlement. That would be easier to resolve under the current arrangements. We couldn't give money to the Welsh Rugby Union because we fell foul of the devolution settlement when they needed it so badly after the flooding damage back in February. And as an example also of UK Gov finding it very difficult to support the citizens of Aberdeen in their COVID lockdown situation because of the devolution settlement, with no ill intention, getting in the way. And this arrangement will make all of that much easier.
Secretary of State, thank you. Rob Roberts. Quickly, please.
Thank you, Chair. the Secretary of State mentioned earlier on engagement with business. So I wanted to explore just briefly what sort of engagement we've had with Welsh businesses on the internal market bill.
I couldn't actually. Can somebody repeat the question? I'm not
I think Rob has asked. Sorry, your microphone's very unclear, Rob. I think he's asking what engagement you've had with Welsh businesses on the internal market bill. Is that correct, Rob? Yeah. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I hope significant. Everybody's had the option to submit to a consultation on the white paper. We had a series of stakeholder engagement meetings back after the white paper was published, and we have had some very helpful responses. I've got a list of them here. People starting, the UK internal market bill will be the making of the UK. It strengthens our bargaining position in new trade deals, avoids unnecessary internal friction, etc., etc. And that's why I said I was so mystified by Welsh Government's response, because Welsh Government's response was so at odds with the response from Welsh business. And I have to say that did worry me.
Secretary of State, thank you. I will bring in Virginia, but also Beth wants just to come in very quickly on this set of questions. Beth Winter.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Hart, you speak about the importance of collaboration and partnership working, but why did not Welsh Government see the internal market bill prior to publication, but more importantly, why were the devolved nations not involved in the drawing up of this bill? Surely that is what a truly collaborative and partnership approach would be.
Well, I think for the same reasons that I don't see draft bills being drawn up by Welsh Government, nor do I expect it, nor do I request it, because the devolution settlement is perfectly clear, and I want to respect those boundaries. There are plenty of legislation passed by Welsh Government which has a UK-wide impact, but if they want to consult me, that's fine. They choose not to, which is also fine. In this instance, however, as far as UKIP is concerned, there has been there will always be people who say there's never enough, or it wasn't long enough, or it wasn't deep enough. But there has been consultation. It has come as no surprise in the whole passage of the Brexit saga that we were going to be going down the road of legislating to create the level, to extend the level playing field that we enjoy under EU conditions to under UK law. There is no surprise about that. We published a white paper. We sought views. We received views. Welsh Government happened to have submitted views which, as I say, are at odds with Welsh business. But we have to move this now to a conclusion. That's what we committed to the 55% of people in Wales who voted in favour of leaving the European Union. And that is what we would be abandoning our duties if we didn't do that.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Finally, Virginia.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the Secretary of State and the Minister. In terms of future economic recovery and financial intervention, as the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme closes at the end of next month, what discussions are being held to support businesses in Wales and the rest of the UK, please?
Shall I go? Yes, thank you. Extensive, I think, probably is the best word to describe, to answer your question. There have been numerous different nuances to the horrible saga of the last few months, which of course has resulted in some sectors being able to, in a sense, sustain themselves with greater ease than others. I don't think it is an exaggeration to say that the schemes put in place by the Treasury certainly were put in place faster than any other country in the world, and certainly were much more far-reaching than any other country in the world. The Chancellor was at pains to say early on in the process that we will not be able to save every job or every business, but we would have a pretty good go at doing exactly that. And, our office, and I suspect constituency MPs as well, are full of a long list of people who have actually been incredibly grateful for the lifeline that has been extended by UK Gov, often in conjunction with Welsh Gov, I should add. And, we're going to try and continue that. However, it's the commitment around furlough, as one such intervention example, has been made very clear by the Chancellor. That is now coming to an end. But he has not, as he never does, ruled out any case being made to him about the need for future or specific assistance, because we absolutely recognise that this thing is changing all the time, as we saw this week, and as a result of that, pressures on businesses also change, often at very short notice, and we need to be flexible enough to respond to those changes.
Thank you. And you mentioned that in my constituency of Honestbourne, 7,400 people were furloughed and their jobs essentially sustained. What assessment has the UK government made of any potential increase in unemployment as a result of the furlough scheme coming to an end at the end of next month?
Well, the UK government hasn't made a specific assessment of what unemployment could rise to as a result of the furlough scheme ending. But as my colleague has just said, Richie Sunak was very clear that we will not be able to save every single job or business. And I think we have to be realistic and assume that there is going to be a rise in unemployment and as businesses failing. But that isn't necessarily as a result of the furlough scheme coming to an end. The Treasury have also been clear that they are very much in listening mode, that they will do everything possible they can to support businesses and individuals who may have fallen through gaps. We brought in, obviously, the reduction in VAT for tourism. We brought in a whole range of other specific schemes, and I believe that the Treasury will continue to listen, and we as ministers will continue to pass on to them a very clear picture of the situation in Wales.
It's just worth pointing out, which I just looked at the notes, that according to the OBR, without the interventions, the unemployment rate could stray as high as 35%, which is 20% higher than predicted, than assessed with the intervention scheme. So I hope that gives a little bit of sort of factual flavour to the answer.
Thank you. And Minister, you mentioned the reduction in VAT, but we've also had the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. And my favourite cafe, one of my favourite cafes, Beach Hut Cafe, and they said to me the scheme has given them much needed boost at a time of great uncertainty. Now, Honestbourne is particularly exposed to the hospitality and the tourism sector. So have you had any discussions with the UK government in terms of supporting specific sectors in Wales? Thank you.
Well, we've had discussions with the UK government and the Welsh government about the tourism sector, and we were very clear that we wanted the tourism sector to reopen as quickly as possible in Wales because of the huge dependence on that. I think it's fair to say that the UK government take a view that rather than helping specific sectors, that they would generally like to help every sector, and that it's difficult to pick one or two out. But clearly things like the VAT reduction have been particularly helpful for the tourism sector. And I think what we're also seeing is that businesses are responding to this crisis as well in their own way. I mean, again, if we are going to chuck out plugs, I think that what Pret a Manger have done is very, very interesting. You know, £20 a month for 5 coffees a day. I mean, you don't have to drink very much coffee to be quids in on something like that. And I've got no connection to the company, by the way, but I think that we'll start to see a whole load more companies doing the same sort of thing, and I encourage that, and I think we the government will help as much as we can, but I think businesses will also be looking to bring forward their own innovative schemes to try and get the economy moving again, and I welcome that.
And by the way, I do have a connection with the company because their bottled water comes from Pembrokeshire, where they employ 100 people extracting it from the ground for that particular brand. So, you know, we think of it as a London-based company. You know, we have a very significant interest in that in West Wales.
Absolutely. Virginia, do you have other questions?
Thank you. My last question. In terms of the government delivering their levelling up agenda, how committed are you to carrying that through, particularly for Wales? And obviously I've got projects like Wilbur Newydd, we're talking about free ports. And how committed are you to levelling up for the people of Wales?
If I can jump in there, I hinted earlier on that we've probably got a reputation around Whitehall these days for being a pain in the neck because we never leave another government department in peace for too long, and we are constantly making these arguments around levelling up and strengthening the union, what it actually means. You know, I want to move from a situation of being accused of making endless promises to actually getting stuff done, actually getting these processes underway. It's going to be slow. In the shopping list that the chair referred to earlier on, that we're never going to get everything that we want on exactly when we want it. But I think we have to be resilient and persistent and make the case constantly about not only why these projects and these proposals are good for Wales, but why they're good for the UK too. And I think we've got really quite an exciting list of possibilities in that regard. So I'm as I say, we will have a reputation for being tiresome if we're doing our job right.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Beth Winter, did you want to come in with a supplementary on furlough?
Yes. Yesterday I attended the Unite SOS launch of their campaign, the jobs campaign. And the TUC, just to shed some light in terms of the likely levels of unemployment, have estimated that by the end of 2020, 2.5 million extra people are likely to be unemployed unless the government takes urgent action to protect workers. Now, yesterday, colleagues from South Wales GE Aviation, who are likely to lose hundreds of jobs in the coming weeks, came up to Parliament, and people are extremely scared and worried about the future prospects. The aviation industry in Wales contributes about 1.5 billion to the economy. The HE sector contributes up to 5 billion in terms of impact. So they're actually generating a huge amount of income. What these sectors need is a short-term sector-specific deal to help them through this initial period. Surely it's in everybody's interest for the UK government to extend the furlough scheme, as other European countries are doing.
Secretary of State.
But two things I want to say only. First of all is I think the Treasury intervention, as I stressed before, has been remarkably quick and remarkably substantive. And I think that even people who are not especially well disposed towards this government or the Treasury recognise that it has gone further and farther and faster than almost any other government in the world. And the intention, the reason for that, has been to meet head-on exactly the concerns that you've just expressed and that constituents which we all have been in touch with have expressed. On the question of sector-specific furlough, I think it is worth, because there was, either a German debate or an opposition day debate last week, and I was quite interested in the comment where they say it may not be the case that this being sector-specific furlough is the most effective or sensible way to provide longer-term support for those sectors who may not yet be reopening. Now, I read that to be the Chancellor quite rightly saying, look, let's not attach ourselves too indelibly to the concept of furlough. There may be other ways which can be fairer, in which we can support individual sectors who may, through no fault of their own, be under extended restrictions as a result of COVID. And I think what's happening here is that we're all talking about furlough as being the only solution. The only solution. Treasury is saying that may not be the case. We will continue to look at all of these pressure points, but don't, as I say, let's not just attach ourselves to furlough as the only possible solution. So I very much take your point, and it's well made, but I say I don't think furlough is necessarily the fairest or best way of dealing with that problem.
Secretary of State.
Can I just come back and
very quickly, Beth,
furlough, given that the European countries do see it as a realistic and a viable option? And if there are other options, what are those? Time is of the essence. People are losing their jobs and livelihoods now. We need action now, Mr. Hart.
Well, I mean, I don't think even its greatest critic could argue that the Treasury did not intervene in every possible way that it could very, very early on, took some breathtaking decisions which nobody thought were possible. Nobody knew how they were. Saved hundreds of thousands of businesses, saved hundreds of thousands of jobs, have kept families financially viable during this awful time. So I just, I'm going to shamelessly stick my thumbs up for the Treasury. and repeat the commitment which the Chancellor has made.
Thank you, Secretary.
The Chancellor has made, which is, nothing is ruled out in these circumstances, and the urgency, goodness me, the urgency is recognised.
Thank you, Secretary. I'm going to bring in the Minister, and then we'll move on, and I'm going to bring in Rob Roberts. But can I just make a comment here, Secretary of State? Isn't it the case that our furlough scheme was designed very much with the comments, informed by the comments of the Prime Minister himself, who said that we would be through this thing by Christmas? That's why the furlough scheme was being wound down for this autumn. The idea was that we would be through the crisis and into the recovery phase. We're nowhere near through this crisis, and the government is still reaching into the toolbox to pull out its major interventions of restricting liberty and economic interruption. Isn't it the case that we are going to kind of need to still stay focused on support measures, particularly for sensitive sectors that simply can't operate in the current environment? We don't want to see irreparable damage being done to our economy and our national life.
I don't think that scenario is doubted. I don't think anybody is suggesting that your assessment of the landscape ahead is in any way wrong. However, what the Treasury have said that the way of addressing that may not necessarily be through extended furlough. There may be other ways, and I'm not here to do the Chancellor's work for him. But all I can do is point towards the record so far, which has been pretty remarkable in the circumstances, and I see no reason why now that should suddenly change. And it is worth pointing out. I think a comment, I can't remember if it was the PM or the Chancellor, early stages of furlough, that it was not designed to be a sort of interim resting place for people between work and unemployment. It was never intended to just put back the date at which you would lose your job. It was meant to be and remains a means of keeping people in a position that they can go back to a sustainable and viable employment once the COVID, the worst of the COVID pandemic is past us. That was its intention.
Yep.
Secretary,
say thank you, Minister.
Well,
very quickly.
Just to say very quickly, we both fully understand the concerns of those in the aviation industry who see a great threat to their industry at the moment and are worried about their jobs and want to do everything to support them. And I understand why Unite were out, but I do just throw one thing back gently and with all courtesy at Labour MPs with connection to Unite, which is that only last year they were calling on people to join the climate strikes and to support action against industries such as the aviation industry. And I think, I would welcome if there's been a change of heart in Unite, a real clarity about the importance of aviation and the automotive industry, and not in future to encourage people to take part in protests, which would have the impact of doing far more devastation to those industries than even COVID has.
Thank you, Minister. Point well made. Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. I'm interested in understanding what discussions the UK government have had with Airbus since July regarding the planned job losses in Broughton. I would like to know how much support the UK government has already given and what support the company has asked for moving forward. And finally, I would like to know whether Airbus has made any comment to you, Secretary of State, about the quality of the assistance they've already received.
Thank you. In no particular order, we have had a number. We have, as you would expect, a regular rhythm of meetings with Airbus at official level and at ministerial level. That was the case actually before COVID, but it's increased in its regularity since COVID. And I'm just looking at notes. We've had 9 such meetings since the 1st of July. Involving us or Wales Office officials. We absolutely recognise the important contribution that Airbus makes to the UK, not just D-side. So this is an incredibly important industry, and as my colleague has just pointed out, this is very much in our thoughts at the moment. Right, on the question of the industry, we put about between £8.5 and £9 billion into the industry, aviation. That's not specifically Airbus, by the way. That should give, I hope, the committee a flavour of how important we feel this industry is. That's in addition to that, there is the value of the furlough scheme, value of tax deferments, value of other interventions which apply across the economy as a whole. And I don't think I'd be speaking out of turn if I said that the comments that we've had from Airbus have been what's highlighting the extraordinary tensions and pressures that they're under, have been incredibly warm towards the contribution made by UK government. And even though we're looking at a really very difficult period of time for the people currently under redundancy consultations, that could have been so much worse had it not been for the interventions that we were able to put together quite quickly. And what I'd like to encourage the committee to accept as well is that the conversations we're having with Airbus are not about getting them through till Christmas or getting them through to the spring. It's about making sure that Airbus are welcome and employing large numbers of people doing the fantastic work that they currently do in Teesside in 5 years, in 10 years and 15 years. This is not about a short-term fix. This is about a long-term solution for an industry which is probably as hard hit as any by COVID.
Rob, are you finished your questions?
Sorry, just one more briefly on the back of that final comment. The last time, one of the previous times that I spoke with Airbus, they made a very long-term commitment to me that they would be staying in Broughton for a significant period of time and that they would be there for the long term, despite Brexit, despite everything else that everything is going on. Have they made that same comment and that same commitment to you, Secretary?
Well, I don't know if you can hear me with the bell in the background.
Yeah. Pause for the bell to finish. Hang
on a second. Thank you. In as many words, yes, all the conversations we've had is about long-term presence. They are incredibly attached to the area, to the workforce, to the future, to continuing to offer their world-class service for as long as possible. They are, there was no talk about this being a managing decline at all. It's quite the opposite. And they were also, by the way, just in case anybody, they did stress, and I hope they won't mind me repeating this in public, they did stress that that our departure from the EU has absolutely no bearing on the current situation that their company finds itself in.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Thank you, Rob. Geraint Davies, you had one very short supplementary to this question, I understand. Geraint?
Yeah, I'm simply going to say that clearly the strategic issue is keeping the airline industry going. The big competitions from Boeing and China, and what we're seeing in France, of course, is a targeted, specific extension of furlough in Airbus. And it wouldn't be possible, Secretary of State, for you to lobby the Chancellor the case for specific targeted extension of furlough rather than a universal approach, because these skills and this R&D we need to keep there. And with all due respect to the consumption side, we can always reflate consumption, but not investment in strategic industry that if they do fall over, won't come back.
Understood. And although it's not a like-for-like comparison, don't forget that 5,000 Airbus jobs have been lost in France. So this is not a difficulty which is unique to the UK. But you can be absolutely sure that there is daily pressure on the Treasury to look after these incredibly important strategic industries, and that the overall point is not lost.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Thank you, Geraint. Tonya Antonazzi.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to a comment made by the Parliamentary Under-Secretary about Unite the Union. I think the idea that Unite the Union would be working against an industry like aviation is quite insulting, and also it was Unite that were the backers of a third runway and are generally pretty obsessed with aviation. So I wonder if he'd like to maybe take back his comments or be more supportive of workers and their trade unions.
Well, I'd certainly like to be supportive of workers. I'm looking at the unitetheunionorg.org website, which I presume is Unite's website, and the headline is Unite calls on union movement to back school climate change strikes. Tuesday 10th of September 2019, and it goes on. It's by Unite Assistant General Secretary Steve Turner, who called on the trade unions to back this called climate strikes. Now, if Unite the Union are thoroughly supportive of the aviation industry and the automotive industry, and I think many of certainly their members will be, those who work in the industries will be very supportive of their own industries. That's fantastic news. I'm with Unite on this particular issue, and she must share my astonishment that senior members of the union, such as Mr. Steve Turner, are calling on their members to go and support protests which would shut down the aviation industry and the automotive industry.
Well, and with respect, sir, we're in a situation here where the aviation industry was working to offset its carbon footprint, and you're referring back to something in 2019,
Absolutely.
which is, which is. Oh, I'm going to move on now because I don't.
Well, I said last year. I mean, if they've changed their mind since last year, it's great. I mean, I want to tell you,
changed their mind.
Great, they have.
I'm going to move on, Chair.
Let's move on, please. Let's move the discussion on.
One of the other things I wanted to, I think the Secretary of State has a fantastic kind of manner about him. He's very hail fellow, well met, and can answer any question in any situation. And it's quite an impressive way to be. And I compliment him for that. But good. Recent decisions made by the Prime Minister have not lessened the anxieties of a Tory member of the Senedd, who has actually stepped down from his front bench role. I find that there are concerns about the Internal Markets Bill. There are concerns about the illegal activity of potential of the government. And what I'd like to ask him is it mystifying, or is it mystifying to the Secretary of State why David Meldon, member of the Senedd, has these concerns?
It's not mystifying for all of us who know David. I just think, by the way, any resignation, and I got in trouble for being a bit outspoken on this during the Brexit process, I think that it's much better to fight our battles from the inside than the outside, more effective. And this legislative process has got a long way to go. And I think all of us need to be able to make our case from the most powerful platform that we can. And there will always be, as there has been with with your own party and all other parties represented on this committee, there have always been moments where people have felt that actually, they've sort of maybe just reached a stage where they feel that it's time for somebody else to engage in the hand-to-hand combat on the front line, and maybe that's the occasion at this moment. But as far as I'm concerned, we are, whatever our views may be, we're better off fighting them from the front than the back.
And just, you've spoken very highly of the Treasury as well, but why has the UK government objected to the joint requests from all three devolved finance ministers for additional borrowing out powers and budgetary flexibility for Wales?
I think I can say with absolute certainty that objection is only valid. Well, it's not valid, and I'll tell you why. Because actually, what we were asked for was to re-enter the debate around borrowing powers, and the way we answered it was actually by providing cash. So I think that the Treasury response was actually rather better than that which was asked. And the numbers are quite clear. During the COVID period, it's been a £4 billion contribution. Actually, that's all Barnetised money, but it also includes upfront payments, 1.1 billion pounds. Get my number of noughts correct. 1.1 billion pounds actually upfront, sort of advance payment of Barnet, in order to provide exactly the flexibility that Rebecca and others in Welsh Government asked for. So again, I think the impression given, perhaps in the question, that somehow, the bad guys in the Treasury had wagged their finger and said no, is not borne out by the facts. And the facts are substantial sums of money, really significant sums of money, have been made available, quite rightly, to Welsh Government, not only on time, but actually in advance of time. And I hope and think that when I have my sort of private conversations with ministers of Welsh Government, actually they're quite grateful for that, at least in private.
So, So,
Final question, please, Tonya. Final question, please.
Sorry, it was just to wrap up, really. So, what discussions have the Treasury been having with you and the other Secretaries of State regarding this request?
Well, I might be able to help you a bit here, because I think that this is best summed up by the letter, which of course need to say I can't find it at the right moment, from the Chief Secretary Treasurer to Rebecca around the funding request. And if it's helpful to the committee, can I circulate it to the committee? It's dated the 17th of August, so it's fairly fresh. Sure. And it's specifically in relation to flooding. But if you want some background information on the additional funding for COVID, very happy to do that. And it sets out very clearly the sort of considerations which are necessary. But again, I say I don't think there's anything here which is particularly disturbing.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary of State. That would be helpful if you could circulate that information to the committee. I'm going to move on to Simon Baines now. Simon.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the Secretary of State and the Minister for coming before us. I wanted to return to the Shared Prosperity Fund, which the Chair touched on at the very beginning, with really two main questions, and I'll put them both together. In terms of how your thinking and the thinking of the government on the Shared Prosperity Fund, to what extent has it been changed or developed by the lessons that we've learned from the COVID-19 crisis? And secondly, I think there is obviously a degree of controversy between the Welsh Government and the British Government in terms of the level of engagement. Maybe you could clarify that and give us some reassurance that the engagement has been up to scratch between the two governments on the preparation of the Shared Prosperity Fund. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, as I indicated earlier on, progress is slow. I wish I could report that the pace had quickened for reasons which I expect everybody's quite sympathetic with. It hasn't quickened as much as we would like. I think the engagement with Welsh Government is an area which is quite easy to find, attractive sort of news angles to. I don't think the situation changed right from the outset when we said that we would, between us, try and design a system which honoured the manifesto commitments that we made, but which was more accountable, which I believe it can be, partly because it's actually going to be accountable to UK-based politicians as opposed to Brussels-based politicians. So that's a step in the right direction, and one which also ensures that the prioritisation of the Shared Prosperity Fund is one which makes sense to businesses and individuals and families in Wales. And to some extent, I expect people are largely not particularly, members of the public, maybe not particularly familiar with exactly what UK structural funding has been able to provide for Wales over the years. I'm hoping under the new arrangements, it's going to be much more obvious. People are going to have much more direct accountability. I hope there'll be more involvement of local authorities, more input from people who might be the happy recipients of some of these substantial sums of money. In order to do that, we need a system, a joint system designed by and implemented by, hopefully, a process of collaboration between UK Gov and Welsh Gov, which enables us to do that. But I don't think I'm saying anything new at all by saying, but it'll look a bit different because it doesn't involve the EU anymore. And I can't see a situation, I would hope, as long as the jobs and livelihoods are the principal driving force of our decision making, why there need to be much disagreement between us and Welsh Government and local authorities in the distribution of these funds. However, there will be tension if the plans don't necessarily tick the jobs and livelihood box. Now, I'm reassured by Welsh Government that they say, no, absolutely, their ambitions are the same as mine in that regard. I'm quite certain when we go to 22 local authorities in Wales at some stage that will be underpinned. And I don't look at everything as of these kind of collaborative attempts. I don't look at everything as a, constitutional threat or a political threat or some kind of, deceitful attempt to undermine the authority of one institution or another. I just think we have to constantly look at it through the prism of jobs. And then, then we don't have to worry about these. And that's why I was so surprised that the Welsh Government reaction to all of the things we've been talking about was so defensive, when Welsh businesses' reaction to it was actually really quite positive.
Thank you for that. And I think, speaking as a North Wales MP, do you think that the Shared Prosperity Fund will be more spread geographically? Because obviously the criteria to date meant that it's in specific areas of Wales. Whereas I think there's a lot of us, in terms of organisations, businesses, charities, local government in North Wales, who would like to see it being more flexible so that it can address pockets of deprivation and high unemployment, wherever they might be across Wales, rather than being in strict zones, as has been the case to date.
Well, although it's an attractive pot of money in terms of its scale, don't forget the £660 million figure, which is often used, does include farming subsidies. So and that commitment remains till the end of this Parliament anyway. So the shared prosperity funds, we need to work out which bits are going to where and which bits there are already commitments over. But if we are genuine about wanting to use this money to tackle deprivation and hardship and to encourage jobs and livelihoods, then of course the views of local authorities, who absolutely have the sort of hands-on, and others, by the way, not just exclusively local authorities, but regional interest groups, who have an absolutely hands-on and daily feel for exactly where the greatest assistance is needed, then I think their input is going to be crucial in this. I don't feel threatened by that as sort of UK Gov. I think we will listen to everybody's bids on this, if that's where we get, with the greatest of interest. And I would struggle to think of a single argument that Welsh Government would be wanting to put forward which contradicts that, because I suspect they, like me, want to see this being properly spread around Wales according to need, and very much taking in the views of local people who deal with these kind of problems every day. I described it on day one as a nice problem to have. The fact is, we are trying to work out how to distribute large sums of money fairly across Wales. That's, to me, we should be embracing that with some enthusiasm.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to move over to Ruth Jones in a moment. Just if I could just pick up again on Shared Prosperity Fund. Is there any truth in the rumour at all that appeared in the summer that it's not even being referred to as the Shared Prosperity Fund within Whitehall at the moment?
Not that I've heard.
So when you have meetings, you're still calling it the Shared Prosperity Fund?
Absolutely. That's what it says on my piece of paper here.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask maybe the Under-Secretary of State for Wales, please, the first question about the Western Gateway. I understand it's now part of your portfolio, so I wonder if you could tell me how you see your work in this area, and obviously how you see it working given its cross-border nature.
Well, it's work in progress at the moment. I've had a number of meetings with Catherine Bennett and other stakeholders involved with that, and also discussed, of course, with the Minister Ken Skates. And with the former Minister Simon Clarke. There have been discussions ongoing around what the absolute borders of the Western Gateway would be. I've had some views that I've shared with ministerial colleagues. My preference would be that it would encompass sort of South Wales over to Swindon, but not perhaps go south of Bristol, if I can put it, or not far south of Bristol, if I can put it that way. But there's an ongoing debate around that. I see it as a potential vehicle for bringing together businesses, universities, trades unions, and other voices in the region to make sure that we can promote this area and attract further jobs and investment.
Thank you. It's good to hear you see it as developing in that way. But I just wonder, how do you see it being prevented from being overshadowed by, say, the Northern Powerhouse or the Midlands Engine?
Well, the Northern Powerhouse has obviously got a head start. By overshadowed, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Ms Jones. You mean sort of, what, in terms of finances or in terms of weight, the sort of influence that it has within the United Kingdom or around the rest of the world? Forgive me for for asking for a clarification there, but I'm not sure quite what you were getting at.
I mean, obviously, they, as you said, they've had a head start.
Yeah.
They're up and running. I would worry that funds might be diverted towards them rather than us. We might lose influence within the UK because we are late starters.
I mean, it's probably a bit hypothetical for me to answer that at the moment, because we're still getting to a stage where we have a governance structure put in place. There's been a proposal around that which looks reasonable to me. Clearly, as always, I would want to work with the Welsh Government. This isn't really just a UK government matter. I mean, it's there with Welsh Government, but also with the local authority stakeholders across the region. So all I can say is we're putting a fair wind behind it. We welcome the fact that members of Parliament like yourself in South Wales are supportive, and your colleague in Newport East, I think, is the chair of the APPG. If I may just gently suggest to you, there seems to be some enthusiasm from some ministers in Welsh Government, but perhaps not quite as much wild enthusiasm from some other ministers in Welsh Government. That might be a misinterpretation on my part, but anything which you can do to encourage all ministers in Welsh Government, and those, of course, who there may be ministerial changes, we know not after May, anything you can do in that regard would be much welcome, but we're certainly supportive.
Okay, thank you very much.
You.
I'm going to move on to steel now. Can I ask the Secretary of State? Obviously, Project Birch was set up to prevent failures of sectors such as steel, but I understand that the discussions have failed with Tata under the auspices of Project Birch. So I'm just wondering what happens next, because I'm sure you share my view that we must not be letting, Port Talbot or Llanwern fail at this time.
I'm a bit. I'm not familiar with with any suggestion that the talks have failed, or what talks have failed, for that matter. All I know is that there are and have been, as I say, predated COVID. There have been discussions going back several years about the future of steel manufacture in Port Talbot, and those, you'd expect that to be the case with a major employer, a major strategic manufacturer like that. That hasn't changed, and there's, as I say, been numerous meetings before and during the COVID period. The comparison to this, I hope, provides a degree of reassurance, is where we were able to get with Selsa, which I think was towards the middle of the worst of the outbreak. And I think that what that helped do was give an indication to the wider public that we are serious about steel in Wales, and we're able to reach a rapid conclusion around the particular problems that they were confronted with at the time, and that was able to be resolved. But I say I don't recognise the suggestion that there have been talks which have collapsed with Tata. It's just not on any radar that I've got access to.
Oh, it must be the fault of the Financial Times then, because obviously I believe they reported it. But I'm sure I'm sure you can clarify that.
Well, I mean, who would I be to question, the reliability of journalism when it comes to the reportage of that particular subject?
Okay, thank you very much. Just one final question regarding the internal market again. You made a point earlier on about you don't see any powers being removed from Wales, but instead you see powers being given to Wales as part of the internal market bill. And I just wonder, to many people it seems an asymmetric bill because it's lopsided in favour of England versus Wales. For instance, the use of single plastics. At the moment Wales is looking to ban 9 particular, things ranging from cotton buds to cutlery. At the moment, England is only looking to ban 3. Now, under the bill, as I see it at the moment, if you have, this lopsided approach, what happens when things come into Wales and you've got 9 things there trying to be banned, 3 things in England. Looking at the bill, it would appear that there would only be 3 things banned in Wales as well.
I think I'd be right in saying that at the moment the lopsidedness is a much greater threat to Wales because it actually involves the arrangements we have with each and every one of EU member states. So I don't think it's fair to say that suddenly there's going to be a collapse of standards or a race to the bottom of those things, but just because we're actually designing a system which applies to the 4 nations of the UK. We've apparently been surviving perfectly well in a system in which 27 member states, including some with much lower environmental and food standard arrangements, are in place. And that has been, we've coped with that, coped to the extent that some people on this call actually want us to continue with that arrangement, even though our voters in Wales opted for a different view. So I think that is an exaggerated risk, if you want my honest opinion, and therefore the suggestion that that somehow contributes to a reduction in powers is, I think, an unsustainable argument. I think, if anything, our powers are enhanced as a consequence of all of this. And also, as we've said, and I know not everybody necessarily always believes these things, we've said as far as those really important issues and the standards associated with them are concerned, the UK already leads the field on most of them and will continue to do so. And there are absolutely no plans. It makes no commercial sense to compromise the standards which we've spent such a long time building up and rightly proud of.
Thank you, Secretary of
I think
State.
Can I just ask, just coming on the final bit there, just to say that in terms of Wales, the idea for 9 single-use plastics banning was as a result of the EU. So, if you like, England is dumbing down there in terms of standards. But I'll let that go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. We'll move on. Robin Miller.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary of State. Can I compliment you on your robustness of answer? It's very welcome to have some real steel.
I've obviously gone far too far.
Questions and answers. So, yes, some good Welsh steel. There we go, in your answers. Llanrwst in the Conwy Valley. Aberconwy, as you know, beautiful area. Conwy Valley runs right down the middle of it. Llanrwst has been subjected to repetitive flooding. At one point, I was talking with some residents, and they were talking about 5 major floods in as many months. And it's not uncommon, but it's a frustration then to residents when we hear talk of flood defences, we hear talk of reviews, etc., and support, etc., being provided, but it doesn't seem to land, or it doesn't seem to land at pace in Aberconwy. I was out walking the defences this summer and looking at them, and I also happened to pick up that in The Guardian you had made a comment about discussions with the Welsh Government about flood relief, and if I can quote you correctly, it said you felt that the discussions did not progress and that it was unfinished business. So I was just keen to understand from you what you meant by unfinished business, and does that mean there's something more we can expect, or there are specific areas that you wish to progress those discussions?
I don't think I was anticipating at the time what the spending powers provision might be in the UKIM bill, but I suppose I might as well have been. But I think there is a reference to this in the letter from Steve Barclay to Rebecca Evans that I referred to earlier on, and which will be circulated. And where the complication has arisen in terms of sort of funding flood defences is around the fact that the legal position, and I stress it's a legal position, all responsibilities for devolved areas and associated funding were transferred to Welsh Government at the point of devolution. This includes responsibility for land drainage, land restoration and flood risk management in Wales. Now, that's a matter which is not disputed either by Welsh Government or by us, but what it does do is subject flood improvements to whatever the available budget is at the time, and as we've learned from Welsh Government, where there is a particularly unusual flooding event, as there was earlier on in this year, sometimes that can sort of soak up years' worth of budget just in dealing with sort of one event. Of course, at the present time, we wouldn't necessarily be able to come to the rescue very easily of this situation because of the restrictions on UK government's ability to spend in devolved areas. If everybody supports a UKIP bill, that will make it much easier because we will be able to sweep away a few of the barriers to that sort of helpful intervention, which I think would be, if you were living in Llanrwst or and elsewhere in your area, would be, a massive relief. So I think there is some potential for progress on this. But of course, the other way we've got to look at flood management is I think that, there has been a bit of a tradition of thinking that the best way of dealing with flood management is to sort of build a concrete channel through every village and town on the watercourse and hope that that resolves the matter. It doesn't. In fact, it probably creates a sort of consequential problem somewhere else. And I think more informed thinking these days is looking about actually how you can hold up the sort of speed at which the flooding might occur and look at those kind of, and that's a better way. I think there's some examples in Scotland or maybe I can't remember where, north of England, possibly Lake District, where that's been incredibly successful. So we've got to be a bit more creative around that. And certainly when I've been talking to councillors in RCT after their horrible experiences in February, there's a much sort of more broad-minded look at how we actually resolve these problems.
Or you've perhaps anticipated my question. I can assure there was no coordination on this, but where I was going to was section 46 of the UKIM bill and the powers that gives the UK government to make investments and make interventions which have a UK-wide impact, or as you suggest, respond to a UK-wide event. And I guess one of the questions then I had was about the source of funding. I think the chairman alluded to that at the start, but have you made any progress, or have you been involved in discussions, perhaps you could tell us, which involve introducing private capital into Wales or seek to attract private capital into Wales?
For the purposes of flood management and defence?
For the purposes of bringing private capital into Wales, how private capital wishes to spend it. So I suppose the target of private.
Sorry, on the purely for flood defence measures, the answer is no. As far as the second, or the sort of the option B of that question, I think it would be wrong to say that there's been a sort of specific campaign of inward investment outside the obvious projects which we're all keen to see undertaken and which will probably at some stage involve some degree of private money. And I think there's been a number of tidal lagoon schemes, for example, which are in various stages of planning around the coast at the moment. Most of those involve a degree of discussion with potential private funders, yeah.
So where I was heading with this then is it would seem to me then that section 46 of the UKIM bill, plus alongside sensible discussions which presumably the Welsh Government are having as well to attract inward investment, this is actually about creating alternative routes for funding, or opening up additional routes, is an even better way of putting it, for funding to come into Wales. Yeah, would that be a fair?
Yeah, I think that is. I think that is a fair sort of resume of the situation. It's about making it simpler and easier and more logical. And where we have had experiences in the past of businesses which have considered Wales as a possible location to create, to land a footprint, build a factory, employ a couple of thousand people, where those proposals have failed, it's largely been down to the fact that the bureaucratic obstacles and the ability to navigate through the multitude of obstacles which seem to get put in people's way has resulted in them looking more favourable in other parts of the UK or indeed other parts of the world. Now, one of the interesting observations about the letter from CST to Rebecca around flood defences is the process that Welsh Government currently has to go through in order to access the UK Reserve Fund for the purposes of emergency assistance. And I used the word emergency erroneously because if you look at the process I have to go through, it's certainly not done at emergency speed. It's actually quite a laborious, and rightly so, we're talking about large sums of public money. There is a process. But to get through that process, we're looking at months, if not, more than one calendar year to access money that in many cases is needed today. Under the new arrangements, if they pass through Parliament unamended, that process just becomes easier rather than doesn't resolve everything. But
I must say I find it hard not to be encouraged by the greater certainty for business, more powers for the Welsh Government, more channels by which funding can come into Wales. I mean, this has got to be good news. It's got to be encouraged. I'm certainly encouraged by it. But rather than leave it as all sunshine and positivity, I must just add one little wrinkle, if I may, and that is I'm hearing stories from England about the universal service obligation on broadband providers in Wales, broadband providers in the UK, of astronomical bills being, or quotes being provided to people under the USO agreement. And I just wondered whether, and we're talking sort of £250,000 to connect the farm, that sort of figure. Now that clearly can't have been in the spirit of the USO. So I was just wondering whether you had heard anything yourself. I know one of my colleagues here.
I haven't, and if anybody on
Simon Baines will be keen to mention what's happening in Fluid South. But I was just wondering whether you were aware of any conversations which were happening in UK Gov which would address that kind of disregard for the spirit of what the USO is all about and ensuring connectivity. Aberconwy is a great example of where that is needed.
I haven't heard those. That situation being described to me. If anybody in the meeting has and wants to let us have details of that, I'd be really keen to get stuck in, because that, of course, is way outside what the purpose of this project is designed to achieve. So if anybody's got examples, I'm happily going to take it up and with this end. Yeah.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you, Secretary of State.
Can I just quickly come in on that point?
Very quickly then, Simon, because I need to bring in
I will be very
Ben
quick. But in the Kerrylock Valley in my constituency, Clwyd South, we've had both the sort of the good and the more challenging aspects, what Robin's been talking about. One is the first USO in Wales, which is at Tregeiriog, and that owes a lot to the local councillor, Trevor Bates, the connectivity officer in Wrexham, Mike Dugene, and the local population. But equally down the road in Pandy, my constituents Alison and Johnny Bendel are finding exactly the problem that Robin's referred to, which is very high bills. There's a fibre optic node that's now been put into the village, but very high bills potentially for linking up to that. So I'll leave my comments there, but I think that's an example of progress, but also still challenging circumstances.
Yeah. Happy to take that up.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. That's a helpful intervention. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I want to return briefly to trade, and in particular trade agreements with non-EU countries. We've already heard this afternoon some members allude to concerns they have over the standards of food production, hygiene, environmental, animal welfare, what have you. It's been a debate, obviously, in Parliament. What is your assessment of concerns outlined by bodies such as the NFU, who, despite the establishment of the Agricultural Commission, still, as of yesterday at least, were quite concerned that there's still a risk that British standards might be impacted negatively by any project?
We've had numerous meetings with the NFU, and in fact, in one of the meetings I've had with them over the last few months, I've raised this issue about their fear of chlorinated chicken or hormone-injected beef coming into the UK. And I've pointed out that this cannot happen under existing legislation. If we wanted to do that, we don't, but if we did, we'd have to come forward with legislation. And there'd be a big debate about it, and I can guarantee there'd be a lot of noise. But we don't intend to do that. And therefore, we could not sign a trade deal with anyone, even if we wanted to, that would allow in hormone-injected beef or chlorinated chicken without changing the law. We're not going to change the law. And I found that privately there seemed to be an acceptance of this. But the legislation, it's in place. We don't, and I'm here in front of a committee saying we have no intention of changing that legislation. We have no intention of reducing standards of food in this country, and that is the right policy.
Thank you. And I think there's nobody in the committee would argue for one moment that the Wales office would ever have an intention of doing that. But I suppose...
so may I just very briefly say that I spoke to George Eustace yesterday. It wasn't a formal meeting. It was, in fact, he was addressing the 1922, and he made that point again yesterday, very clearly in front of a lot of backbenchers. So there really is no intention. We will not do that. We do not want to change legislation to allow chlorinated chicken or hormone-injected beef to come into this country. That will not be a part of any trade deal. And while I'm at it, Again, want to make absolutely clear that it's a separate issue, nor will we put the NHS up for sale, sell it off, privatise it in any way or run it down. That will never ever be a part of any trade deal.
No. But you've anticipated my next question, because I was going to ask about the role that the Wales office can play in working with colleagues from DEFRA, but also I suppose the Department of International Trade in the formulation and some of the discussions with trade negotiations with non-EU countries. I just wondered if you could very briefly just outline some of the ways in which you work with your colleagues in other departments, and how can the Welsh interest, as it were, be injected into those discussions.
Well, obviously we have a lot of meetings with key stakeholders such as the farming unions, but also with the CBI, business groups, and with trade unions as well. And it's very important that we do. And I respect the role of trade unions, by the way, and I do want to make that clear. They play a very, very important role. So I've already met with trade unions, including Unite, in my role as a junior minister, and we will be passing on their views. And we, of course, want to do what's best for Wales, and we will be feeding that in, formally and informally, with ministerial colleagues at every opportunity.
Are you confident that your colleagues in other departments, are able to really honour those kind of interventions and those contributions? Do you feel as though they are taking Welsh interests in the level that we would want them to prioritise it?
Well, I wouldn't argue against my own job, because if everyone automatically took in favour Welsh interests, I suppose you wouldn't need the pair of us, Mr. Lake. So I think that my colleague and I will take every opportunity to put forward those interests.
There's an obvious point, Chair, if I may, it's around the completely sort of refreshed attitude to the union. I'm sorry to raise this in your presence, but refreshed attitude to the union within UK government, and particularly within the Cabinet Office, and led by Michael Gove, but involving the Territorial Secretary of State and the devolved administrations in I think a much more a positive way than has been the case since I've been since 2010, since I've been a member, and I think COVID has actually accelerated that process of sort of enforced cooperation. For all the wrong reasons, we've ended up in actually probably a better place, which is weekly, sometimes daily meetings on a whole range of topics, particularly around Brexit readiness and trade deals, which involve probably a meeting a week or 2 meetings a week at ministerial level. But the countless engagements at official level between Wales Office, DEFRA, Home Office and their equivalents in Welsh Government. And I think that's sometimes an underreported element of all of this. And I go back to the Mark Drakeford thing about 8 out of 10 occasions we agree on most things. And actually there's a lot of stuff going on sort of below the waterline around some really quite sort of niche areas of activity, whether it's in trade deals or whether it's in response to COVID. And it's really good. And people would be reassured if they could see it.
To be fair. And bearing that in mind, then, were you slightly disappointed that DEFRA didn't make an application to the World Organisation for Animal Health to list Welsh beef, along with English beef, I should say, as negligible or low risk for BSE?
I thought you were going to ask about the small ruminants rule and Welsh lamb, actually, in which case, it remains, actually, by the way, while I'm on that subject, a much more active area of sort of discussion and debate than, I don't know how it's going to end, mind you, but I think it's become quite a sort of significant part of the discussions with the US around food standards, etc. On the question, I don't have, if you have a view, I don't have a view on the Welsh beef position, and we can get you one.
I think it's a fair question, which I can't fully answer at the moment, but if you were to write
then... And then finally, just because a request more than a question, really, and you may be aware that there are, to my knowledge, 2 Welsh products currently in the final stages of EU PGI and PDO kind of certified protected food schemes, and one is, I believe, the Gower salt marsh lamb. Another one, then, I should probably declare a parochial interest in that it's Cambrian Mountains lamb, both of which have products of years of work. They've, to my understanding, completed most of the certification requirements for the EU scheme, but they may fall tantalisingly short of the publication and notification period that is required for them to fully be certified. My question is, if that were to occur, Do you think there's any opportunity to have discussions with DEFRA that their applications might be expedited under the UK geographical indicator scheme? Because there would be products that will have been verified and gone through most of the checks, albeit under the EU scheme.
Mr. Lake, I must congratulate you because I have a briefing on this somewhere and I can't find it at the moment on this very point. And therefore, rather than, I'll admit to that straight away, rather than rustle through. It's an issue that is on our radar. It is in this pack somewhere. And again, if you write to us, we would look very favourably at doing just that. And I believe that I will be visiting your constituency in the near future to look at food production. So perhaps that could be part of the official visit. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I do think, by the way, just add a sort of word of support to that. I think if there are anomalies like this which appear to be sort of inexplicable, it's probably, if I'm allowed to say, cock up rather than conspiracy. That's what it probably is, and at the pace of these things, there will be areas which might not have just sort of registered on the radar, and we will happily take them up. Really, I mean, just tell us and we'll do it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Secretary of State. Can I just follow up on Ben's line of questioning? Because I was very encouraged to hear the Under Secretary speak so strongly about wanting to resist the import of hormone-treated beef, chlorinated chicken from the US. I've heard the assurances that ministers have given on that. But given the appetite within government for striking a US trade deal, given that we know and the US government have been very, very open about their trade priorities and wanting to secure access for agricultural products into the UK under a trade deal, how confident are you both, Secretary of State and Minister, that Britain outside the EU could resist the demands from the US for access for these particular products? And I'm thinking in particular of hormone-treated beef, which of course it's questionable whether the EU ban on hormone-treated beef is compliant with World Trade Organization rules. How confident that post-Brexit the UK could stand up to the US and say, sorry, we're just not going to do that?
Well, I think if the European Union can do it, then there's absolutely no reason why we can't do it. We've got legislation already in place, and we've got no plans to bring further legislation in place to amend it or disavow it. I'm sure if we did, Mr. Chairman, then you'd be the first to drag us back in front of this committee, and the only thing we'd be eating would be a whole load of humble pie. Can I just answer the question from Mr. Lake? Which I can now inform him that I would be willing to write to officials on that particular issue, and that the UK government have been clear that they will repatriate any unresolved EU applications to the UK scheme and process them with minimal additional burden.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that?
Very quickly, in support of David TC on that point of food standards and about what would be required for us in the UK Parliament in order to, if you like, reverse that policy. And I think it's absolutely plain. In order to do that, not only would a number of ministers who've repeatedly made pledges have to somehow explain why those pledges were no longer valid, but there would need to be a parliamentary vote. And I can't see there being an appetite on any side of the House to reduce. It's one of the things that I think we're probably all largely agreed on. It's the fact that part of our USP as a food producer is the fact that we produce really good stuff to a high quality, and therefore, even when we're offered the option of buying a cheaper product, perhaps raised to or manufactured to lesser standards, we don't go down that route now. So I don't see us going down that route any time in the future, and I certainly don't see us going down the route of changing the law in order to almost facilitate that.
Well, I'm greatly encouraged to hear that, because last week the committee took evidence from a panel of 3 very distinguished UK trade policy experts who represent different views on the Brexit Remains spectrum, one of whom is quite closely involved with UK government development of trade policy. And I have to say the panel were pretty sceptical that we would be able to maintain our position in the face of US government pressure for access for these agricultural products. So I'm encouraged by what you say on that. I'm going to bring in, there's a few colleagues who want to ask supplementaries, and I think first up, Beth Winter. You need to unmute, Beth.
I'll ask the one on the internal markets because I appreciate that that's the topic that we're now covering. Sorry, I did have a couple of other. I mean, there's a genuine concern within Wales that the White Paper proposes a race to the bottom where the lowest regulatory standards by any of the four UK governments will become the default standard for all. Because the mutual recognition principle is impossible without agreed minimum standards. And I really am concerned that, if England does take hormone injected beef, for instance, it's going to be imposed on Wales, and it's the lowest standard that will exist. And I don't feel you've addressed that issue at all.
With all due respect, Ms Winter, we cannot take hormone-injected beef. It is against the law to do so. And even if a trade deal was signed, it would still be against the law to do so. So unless the law changes, it's not going to come in. It would not be allowed in under the law.
But what about the issue about it being a race to the bottom in terms of the concerns that have been expressed by Mark Drakeford yesterday, and Jeremy Miles has very strongly articulated this, about the concerns over the mutual recognition principle?
Well, I think that is important for producers across the United Kingdom so that they have certainty they can send their goods across the UK. It's as important for Welsh sheep farmers, producers of honey and all the other the foods that we produce in Wales. But the idea that people in England would somehow be happy to have lower standards than other people is I think, not really grounded in any fact. The English would expect high food standards just as Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland.
At the moment, there is a choice. We can buy our pork from Denmark, or we can buy our chickens from Poland without necessarily knowing the standards to which they are produced. People already make informed choices around their food purchases, as it is at the moment. And as I said earlier on, essentially what we're doing is enshrining in UK law exactly the arrangements which currently exist. So if that concern that it would trigger a race to the bottom is valid, it would have happened by now, because the bottom would have been evident in one of the other 26 member states of the EU. It's not going to suddenly appear now.
But the legislation...
Beth, very quickly, Beth,
yeah,
please.
But the legislation would prevent the Senedd and Welsh ministers from imposing mandatory requirements relating to lawful sale of goods and services in Wales, even where there's a justification for doing so for public health objectives, environmental concerns, or any other public policy reasons. The legislation would prevent them from doing that.
But of course they don't have that power at the moment, because that isn't a devolved power. That is a power that currently rests with the European Union. The European Union sets standards and has created a single market. Those single market standards will now be set by a UK government with of course, strong representation from Wales. But obviously the standards for a single market have to be set somewhere, and they'll be set at the UK government level, which is, I would have thought, a fairly natural thing to do, given that it's the United Kingdom as a whole that will have to comply with those standards. There's been no power taken away from the Welsh Government.
Brilliant. Minister, thank you. Garrett Davies, I think you had a quick supplementary as well.
So, May, Chair, and the simple fact is that the World Trade Organization has ruled against the EU on discrimination against hormone-impregnated beef and chlorinated chicken, but the EU is strong enough to stand up to the WTO. Once we're Brexited, which of course we are, and if we're operating under WTO rules, in particular in a no deal, then we will have to comply with their rules, which means taking chlorinated chicken and hormone-impregnated meat. And what's more, we'll be bashed over the head by the United States. We'll be standing alone rather than together with the EU. So
question, please, Geraint.
I know it's UK law, but how can you realistically believe that we won't have to abide by WTO standards outside the EU?
That would of course depend on whether we wanted to apply to adhere to WTO rules or not. I assume that we probably would, but I assume that we will continue to oppose any changes that will allow chlorinated chicken or hormone-injected beef into the United Kingdom. It's rather a separate issue to the UK internal market paper, which has got absolutely nothing to do with the WTO.
Can I make a cheeky aside? I think if more people had...
Sorry, Garrett.
The US standards agreed by England, we'll have to have them in Wales. That's the only point.
Sorry, Garrett, I think the Secretary of State was trying to
I was
answer.
going to gently tease you by saying if you had supported the original deal as proposed, then we wouldn't be at threat of trading under WTO rules.
Fine. Look, this is questions to you, Secretary of State and the Minister, not to members of the committee.
Now.
We will move on. Are there any final supplementaries from any members of the committee? Signal now. Oh, Beth, is that a hand I see? Come on in, Beth, quickly then, please.
Sorry, I had a couple of questions, but will I have time for those later?
You've got the slot now, if you're quick.
But it was a supplementary to something Robin earlier raised, was about flooding. My constituency around the kind of staff was the worst hit, I think, throughout the UK. And there's an estimated cost of about £70 million, which we've been spending from reserves from Welsh Government. Now, following Storm Dennis floods, the Prime Minister made it very clear in the Chamber that further additional support would be provided. That has not transpired. Please, Secretary of State, can you give us assurances and a date by which we will receive the money that we require to repair the damage caused by the floods? We are desperate for this.
Yeah, I very much understand. The letter to Rebecca Evans was asking for... this request was written on the 17th of August. As far as I'm aware, we haven't had a reply to that yet. And that sets out the process by which Welsh Government could access the UK reserve in order to move this matter on. So I can't give you a date as yet because Rebecca hasn't, as far as I know, and it may have come in the last couple of days, Rebecca hasn't, as far as I know, made her bid to the Treasury to the UK reserve. So until that happens, I can't give you the answer that you want.
I think it does underline the importance of UK government being able, in certain circumstances, to channel funding directly to local authorities, communities or businesses that have been affected by a crisis without necessarily having to go through the restrictive Barnett formula. And I'm sure you might perhaps see the advantage of that.
I'll take that back to the Minister, thank you. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on, sorry, we talked about the Shared Prosperity Fund earlier, and I found your comments, Mr. Hart, quite concerning and quite vague. We're now in September. We have until the end of the year to establish, what this Shared Prosperity Fund is going to look like and how much it's going to provide. Can you please give us more concrete assurances about the Shared Prosperity Fund, and specifically that it will not involve a penny less or a power lost for us here in Wales, please?
Well, at the beginning of the session, I did say that all the commitments which we'd previously made around SPF remain. So I hope that answers that particular part of the question. I've also acknowledged that the pace at which we've been able to progress this has been quite slow. I've got a meeting with Jeremy Miles next week. Unfortunately, the Minister who was responsible for this had to step down this week for personal reasons, so we're going to play in a new one, hopefully by next week, to take this matter on. There might be some dispute, by the way, around whether all of the arrangements have to be absolutely in place by the 1st of January 2021. I don't think anybody's necessarily of the view that if these conclusions are not reached by then, the whole thing falls over. So as I say, commitments remain. I hope that's clear.
So what we're looking at, Secretary of State, is a short-term fix to get us through into the new period because the work hasn't been done within Whitehall to deliver this policy.
As ever, the sort of parachute answer is no ideas are off the table or something like that. But I'm seeing Jeremy next week, and I said, hold my hands up. I wish we could have done this faster, but there have been some other tiresome obstacles along the route. But I hope that the reassuring thing I can say is none of the commitments that we've previously made have been altered, changed, reversed, or cancelled.
Okay. Just in the few minutes. Thank you, Beth. In the few minutes that we've got remaining, can I just ask you a few boring process questions. When was the last time you met with the First Minister?
I had a telephone conversation with him yesterday, with Michael Gove and the other territorial Secretaries of State, with him and Nicola Sturgeon, Arlene and Michelle. I think we're all on the call, in COVID-related matters. And those calls take place, they don't follow an absolute regular pattern, but they're pretty frequent. And they involve
Give us a sense of what pretty frequent is. Every few weeks?
Weekly, fortnightly.
Okay.
I have a weekly call with Ken Skates on economic matters. We paused a little bit in August for that, spoke to Ken this morning. And officials are, as you can imagine, in very regular contact, much more regular than we are. So,
are the COBRA meetings still happening?
COBRA meetings, no.
Why did they stop?
Well, they've been sort of replaced by other meetings which achieve the same outcome, slightly smaller audience, and deal with more specific issues. And the COBRA meetings early on were about designing the overall sort of UK-wide response to COVID, I think in particular. And they've been then replaced by more sort of operational and implementation groups, which involve smaller numbers of people.
Do Welsh Government sit on those groups?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And there've been a number of meetings actually where Welsh Government sit on the group and I don't, which used to make me quite sort of paranoid in the early days. But actually there was good logic in that, and the three territorial secretaries of state understand how the arrangements work. No, those are they're pretty regular, and I said they don't always reach consensus, but.
And the First Minister himself seemed a bit miffed earlier in the summer that he hadn't had a meeting for quite some time with the Prime Minister. Has he had a chance to see the Prime Minister at all in recent months? I mean,
various people in this call have been in government, you've been in government. Meetings with the Prime Minister don't happen that often. So I don't think that the future recovery from COVID, the future management of a post-Brexit Britain is necessarily defined by the number of times that Mark Drakeford gets some FaceTime with Boris Johnson.
He obviously feels strongly about it.
He never mentioned it yesterday on the call. He hasn't mentioned it on that often when I've been on calls with him. I think to me, that seems a little bit sort of, the emphasis seems to be a little bit more, too much on process and not enough on outcomes. And at the end of the day, we all know that they can have a conversation, but there's a whole machinery designed by and manned by officials who then do all of the after work. And that's happening anyway. There's a huge amount of collaboration, cooperation, and I don't think it's necessarily anything sinister in the fact that they don't necessarily have a chat over a cup of tea twice a week. I don't think that's necessarily the answer to some of the problems that we're confronting.
In previous sessions with you, Secretary of State, you kind of almost quite strong hints that perhaps some of the protestations and criticisms that Welsh Government make publicly, perhaps their tone behind closed doors is a lot more pragmatic and cordial. Do you think that's going to still be the case over this? Over their reaction on the internal markets bill?
I'm probably guilty of that myself to some extent, because we have to sort of react in the public glare and make our case very sort of clear and concise and understand and explain our differences. Actually, with the nuts and bolts of handling COVID and all of the other associated issues that we've been discussing this afternoon, most of that is done very amicably. For example, my call with Ken Skates this morning covered 5 or 6 issues which are relevant to the economy of Wales. I had some questions for him. He had some questions for me. We're both going away to take some further advice about how we can iron out a few wrinkles that we've come across in the next 2 weeks. And I think that actually I've always said that I wish there was more of that in a way. It doesn't attract the attention of media in Wales particularly because it's not a flaming row or a disagreement. It's actually getting on with the often quite dull business of day-to-day government. And I don't think, by the way, the fact that there has been to quote Michael Gove, a bump in the road in terms of UKIM, I personally don't see that as bringing to an end the collaborative arrangements that I've strived quite hard to create in this role. It is a sort of almost an endeavour on a really big, very sort of strong policy area. I can completely understand why we were not likely to reach early agreement over that, but I hope we can have our disagreements in a reasonably civilised tone, I hope, but at the same time we have to leave everybody in no doubt as exactly where this is going and why. And as soon as we've done that, it will be business as far as I'm concerned, business as usual with Mark Drakeford, Ken Skates, Vaughan Geth and all the people that I deal with in Welsh Government on a daily basis.
So if we get to the point where Scottish Government, Welsh Government refuse to lend their support through whatever legislative mechanisms they use to this bill, you would feel nevertheless content that the bill sets the framework for the internal market without the assent of the devolved administrations. And that wouldn't for you represent a kind of defining moment in relations between UK and governments?
I can be absolutely confident in saying that I will feel content that we have sort of tried every possible means at our disposal to reach agreement. We will have had the debates and the arguments and the consultations. They may not be enough or loud enough or long enough, but we will have nonetheless made every effort to reach a happy conclusion. If we don't, it will be not dissimilar to the way that it was over the withdrawal agreement when Welsh Government chose to withhold a legislative consent motion. It's a pity, but it's not terminal. And as we know with LCMs, there is quite an emphasis on the not normally description, i.e. are the circumstances we're discussing, outside the parameters of sort of normality. And certainly in the case of the withdrawal agreement, I think that very much applied, and I don't think anybody would argue that the kind of discussions we're having now are, they're not routine, government dialogue. These are extraordinary times requiring extraordinary, bold legislative measures. And if we can't reach agreement and Welsh Government decide to exercise their democratic right to withhold LCMs, we will live to fight another day.
Okay. Secretary of State, thank you very much. Minister, thank you very much for both of you for your time, your generosity of time, the full and frank answers that you've given us, and we hope that we will see you again in front of us, not in the distant future, within perhaps a few weeks or a couple of months maybe.
Thank you.
That would be great.
Cheers,
thank you to my colleagues on the committee for making this such a useful session. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.